My name is Colin Jones, and I'm Web and Applications Team Leader at the Robert Gordon University. And what I'm going to talk to you today is about Agile tools and techniques. As a development team, we've been using Agile for many years now, and what I'm going to try to show you today are some of the techniques that we use in the development team that can actually be used in a wider context that potentially you can use for other projects as well. So hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll see some of the techniques that we're using as developers, and hopefully you'll be able to see where you can use these in other areas as well. So why did we move to Agile in the first place? Well, you're probably familiar with this type of traditional method for project management, specifically when you're doing development, the waterfall type of methodology. We used this. You have a big upfront requirements gathering phase, so you're working with the users to get all the requirements together at once. You then have a big design phase where you do all the detailed design work and work on the entire program of everything that you're going to do. You then lob that all over to your developers, and somebody said earlier on about the developers sitting in the dungeon down below. We moved into our new office, and the development team ended up in this corner that didn't have any windows. I don't know whether that was by design or what, but we're certainly in the corner around the side. Your developers then go ahead and build this big project. Out it all goes for testing when you got to the end of the project, and then we lob it over to operations to maintain it. So there were some problems with this. When we were looking at this, we'd been using this type of traditional methodology for a long time. Key problems were around requirements gathering. It tends to be very prolonged because you've got to get everything out at the beginning. You're trying to find everything that the users want. It tends to be inaccurate. Users, when they're thinking about how they want something to work, don't often think about everything that they want at the beginning, so you'll miss things out. When you actually start to use an application, when you've actually developed something, they'll then think, oh, well, this doesn't work as well as we thought it would. We want to change it. And there's a tendency amongst type of that traditional project approach for changes not to be desired. You know, you've got to have change control around your project. And there's a tendency to say, you know, scope creep is coming in, things like that. So there's this tendency not to want to change the project once you've fixed your requirements and your design and everything. Estimation, no consistent real method for estimation. You know, come to me, I'm lead person in the team, I've got experience and knowledge, and they'll say, how long do you think this will take? And I'll go, yeah, I think that'll take 3 weeks, just based on experience. And so all these dates and times that you put in go into your big Gantt chart, and each one of your boxes on your Gantt chart has an error associated with it because they're not going to be accurate, so that by the time you get to the end of the Gantt chart, all these errors have accumulated up, and you're not running to the time that you ever thought you were going to at all. And testing is difficult and time-consuming because you've got this big monolithic project where you've done all your development and then you're saying, right, let's get on and test this. There's a lot more to do for testing from the development team, but also your user community, who are often involved in the testing phase, have to commit a lot more resources to it over a period of time, which was often difficult for them because they've obviously got their normal day jobs to do as well. Very quickly, you've probably all heard of Agile in some way, and probably some of you are probably using some of these techniques as well. But just very quickly, the Agile Manifesto has a few things that it says. We've come to value individuals and interactions over the processes and the tools. So Agile is all about communication. It's all about getting together with the users, with the customer, saying, you know, what are the things that you want over and above the processes and the tools. This is not to say the things that are going to appear on the right here aren't used and aren't important. They are. But if you're going to say which one are the more important, it's about the communication. Working software over comprehensive documentation. When we're developing software for the university, it's got to deliver for the university, and that's the important thing. Dotting every I and crossing every T in your documentation for your requirements that are never going to be opened again once you've done it, that's not the key thing. That's not what we're trying to do. We want working software that delivers benefit to the customer. And customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Again, when you have this big requirements phase, as I said, you have this tendency to say, right, we've fixed it now. This is what we're going to deliver to you. We're not going to be able to change this. Whereas what we're talking about here is it's all about collaborating. It's all about teamwork. It's getting the best thing for the customer. And we're also about responding to change over following the plan. The plan is great 6 months ago, but if the business has changed, the business has changed, and we need to be able to adapt to that. So how do we, one of the techniques that we use then in gathering requirements for a project in Agile is we use something called Agile Stories. And so we get together, all the team that's going to be involved, that's the developers, that's the users, that's the customers, project managers, we all get together around the table, and we actually use these pieces of paper. We go old school in actual fact, and we use a piece of paper like this, which is slightly formatted, slightly oddly, but where we've got 3 things on it, which says, as a type of user, we want to do something so that something else will happen. So for an example, if we've got something that says we're going to notify new travel requests in an application. So as a travel authorizer, if I'm that type of user in the system, I want to receive a new request email when a request comes in so that I know that there are requests waiting. And what we do is we go around brainstorming effectively all the requirements from all the different users that we have. And we build up a catalogue of Agile stories that are describing, at a very high level, the requirements for the piece of software. What we then do with those requirements, we've got this catalogue, this pile of Agile stories, and we say, we're going to go to the developers and we say, let's have a look at this, how big these things are. We've got our list of stories. The development team are going to discuss this, think about what's involved technically, think about how complicated that story is going to be, include any thoughts about how we test it. And we're going to work through all the stories. At this point, we're going to do something. We're going to have a little game. So you're going to have to pay attention to the screen because it's going to flash up quite quickly. But what I'm going to do in a moment, a number of dots are going to flash on the screen. And I'm going to then ask you to estimate how many dots there were. So, are you watching? Okay, hands up for 1 dot. 2, 3, 4 to 5, 6 to 8, 8 to 13. Couple. 13 plus? No. Well, the answer was 6 to 8. And I think almost all of you in the room got that. There was 1 or 2 who thought it was slightly higher, but almost all of you got that. So we're going to do this again. Same again, so watch the screen. Okay, I'm going to ask the same question. We'll not start with the real low ones. 4 to 5, no. 6 to 8, 8 to 13, 14 to 21, got a couple of hands up there. 22 to 34, oh, quite a few more. 35 to 55, a bit of a split between those 2 ones there. 56 to 89. The answer is 35. It's 37, actually, 35 to 55. What I'm trying to illustrate here is the smaller something is, the easier it is to estimate, because you can see the whole thing at once. So if I've got to create a web page, I can probably tell you I can do it in an hour. The bigger and more complicated something becomes, the more difficult the estimation is, and the less accurate your estimate is likely to be. So some of you may have seen the numbers on the screen there, and I'll put them up there. We had some ranges of numbers. Any mathematically minded among you know what these numbers are? It is the Fibonacci sequence. And there's no particular reason why we're using these in Agile. It just so happens that the numbers get bigger as they go along. And so it's a useful set of numbers to say, when we're going to estimate the size of our stories, the bigger something is, the less accurate the estimate is likely to be. So we're not going to start to argue about whether it's 56 or 57. If it's in that type of range, we're going to give it one of those numbers. And you see at the title there is Agile Poker. This is one of the ways that we actually estimate the different stories. So, how does that work? Well, all those numbers, we get printed onto cards. And I have heaps of packs of cards back at the office, which have the Fibonacci sequence printed on them like this. And all these packs of cards get given to our developers. There are some additional cards along with these ones. These are the numbers that you've just seen. We've got some special cards as well, a 0, so that when we're doing estimation, if we think it's really tiny, if we think this is too small to even give a 1, we can use the 0 card. We have an infinity one. This is really used when it's either so huge that we don't know what to do with it, or we haven't got enough information, really. We're saying, well, it could be anything, effectively, because we don't have enough to be able to size this one, to estimate the size for it. Pop in a half for good measure. And very important, if you're doing Agile estimation all day, then quite often somebody will want to play the coffee card so that we can have a break. So how does this work? Well, we have our team of developers. We've already gone through with the customers and got this set of requirements, the Agile Stories. So we know the high-level requirements for the project. The developers who are actually going to do the project, who are going to do the actual work now, sit down and take each one of these stories in turn. And we have a discussion. We talk about, what's involved. Are there going to be web pages? Is it going to be database things? How are we going to actually deliver this? What are the technical aspects to this? Once we've had that discussion, then we have a vote. This is where you get your poker cards out, and you take your card, and we all put them on the table at once. Gone too far. So you can see there, we've got quite a consistent thing. We've got a few people voting 8. We've got one who's voted 5, which is fairly close to 8 anyway. So what we would have, a little discussion with this member of the team, saying, do you think that this is a little bit smaller? And they'll have a discussion. Usually they'll come and say, well, yeah, I'll go with 8 as well. And I was amazed at how consistent these were. When I first started this, before we did any Agile at all, I'd seen this type of thing done. I thought, well, surely we'll be all over the place. But I was actually amazed in how consistent the votes become. We have the discussion, we do the votes, and very often they are all about the same level. We then go through the next story, and we do this for each one of the stories. So we have our discussion, and we have our vote. Now, again, formatting is slightly odd on these, but we've got somebody has voted 34 there. Now, that is quite significantly different to the rest of the votes. And this is quite important as well, because what we can now have is a discussion with that person, because one of two things might have happened. Either they have misunderstood something that we've been talking about, and so they've overestimated it, or they've actually thought of something else that nobody's thought of. So we can have that discussion, and they go, but you've not thought of this. And you go, you're right. We all need to have another vote on this and see and revise our estimate. So we go through the Agile Stories, the whole lot of them, and at the end of that, what we have is an estimated relative size for each story. Just to give you the context of how we do that sizing, when we have this Agile Story points, we talk about 1 point being equal to an ideal day. That is, you come into the office, you have no interruptions, you don't have lunch, you do nothing but that one thing. Of course, that doesn't happen in real life, so that's only to give everybody a context about the type of size that you're talking in the points. Once we've got all the stories estimated, then we carry out a quick sanity check, because what we're really trying to achieve with this is the relative sizes of things. Is that 3-point thing really type of a quarter of size of the 13-point thing? So we go through the stories that we've sized, and we say, have we actually got the correct relative sizes for everything? The good thing about this is it's not just me saying, I think it's going to take my developers 3 weeks to do this. Because everybody's had that conversation, they've all had a buy-in, we've got everybody saying, yeah, we're all agreed that we think that this is how big this piece of work is. And this technique can also be then used at sizing at different levels. We're talking about sizing the overall project at this point, so as I say, we're talking about ideal days there. But we can also then start to talk about tasks, and you'll see in a moment that I'll go on to how we actually break down the work. But the tasks we can talk about, for example, ideal hours. So the sizing can be flexed to different things as well. We then enter these stories. We've used our pieces of paper up until this point, but we then enter these stories into a system like Track or Jira, which is an online system which allows us to manage the work. It allows us to give work out to developers. They can log on and see what stories and what tasks they've got to do. So we've got our list of requirements, our Agile Stories, which are agreed with the customer, and everybody's agreed with them. We've taken those to our developers, the people who are actually going to do the work in the project. They've gone and looked at that and thought about how that's going to be delivered and given them relative sizes. We're now going to go back and decide on what the priority is with the customer. And this is quite important because the customer may change the priority once they understand how big something is. So if we've said that this particular feature that you're asking for is huge, they may go, oh, well, I really wanted that, but now that you've said that, I'd rather you concentrated on the bulk of this work first. So the prioritization is quite important as well. And we use Moscow, and I think there was a slide earlier on, in actual fact, which had a bit of Moscow on. Moscow is a technique, a very simple technique for assigning priorities. M stands for must-haves. These are things that we can't do without. They're critical to the project delivery. The project has effectively failed if we don't deliver these ones. So we go through with the customer, through all the stories, we say, which are the must-haves for this project? The should-haves are very important. They're key functionality. They can be key things, key parts, key deliverables of the project. And we really want to have them in there. At a push, you maybe could go without it for a bit, but you're going to want to do it very soon. We then have the could-haves. These are the optional items, the functions that people want to see, and absolutely, if we're storming ahead and we've got time, we'll put as many of these ones in as well. And there may be things that we'll say that we won't have. These are perhaps perfectly good ideas, but we say right at the outset, we're actually not going to do this at this point. We're going to leave that perhaps for a later project, do it again at a later time. So once we've done this, we have our stories, we've sized them, we've got now prioritized what we call a product backlog in terms of Agile. And this leads us on to sprints or iterations. We actually call them iterations more, but the terminology is interchangeable. We have our product backlog stories. This is the whole scope of the project. And what we do is we pick a certain number of these stories to work on in what we call the sprint. And we break that sprint down into tasks. And these individual tasks we size again in the same way as we did with the initial user stories. And we fix this on a 3-week schedule. I apologize, it was white on my slide, this text, it's come out black unfortunately on here. A 3-week schedule where we're going to do a piece of work and go through all the sprint backlog, and the developers agree and make a commitment that that's what we're going to work on in that period of time. We then produce at the end of this a production-ready product increment. Now, in terms of developing, we might have developed, for example, a login page. And if that's all we've done at the moment, we're not going to obviously release that to the users if all they can do is log in and nothing else happens. But when we're working through these iterations, we'll repeat that sprint and we'll take more stories from the thing, we'll break that down into tasks, we'll work on it again, and we'll produce a production-ready element at the end of it. As that goes along, at a point in time, we may reach a critical mass that says, we've actually got enough now to deliver this to the organization and then to get real business benefit from it. We've not finished the whole project. There's still all these other stories that we've got to do, but we've got enough critical mass here to say, yeah, let's go live with this and carry on with the development and release additional features as they come on. We've also got the daily scrum there. This is this type of every day we have a scrum. This is a stand-up meeting, which is 10 to 15 minutes. We ask 3 questions of the developers. What did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And are there any problems or issues? And these 3 questions have to be very quickly answered. And it's just to aid that communication. It's to make sure that everybody's communicating together, to make sure you don't have your developers sat for 3 weeks, trying out to do a problem, not bringing it to anybody's attention. If there are things that are blocking them, that's the project manager, the scrum master in Agile terminology, who can then go and see if they can unblock some of the problems that people are having. So we have an iterative process. We fixed on a 3-week schedule. This is the one that we use where we have a development phase. Because we're doing programming, we then have a freeze point where we don't start any new work. We have a finish up phase where we then allow the developers to finish the sections that they're doing. Tag and release, this is all development stuff. We actually have our planning on the Friday. As you see, the planning a bit odd being at the end, but it's really for the start of the next iteration. Just because it worked best for us, our developers like to come in on the Monday knowing what they're going to do rather than starting the Monday with the planning session. So that worked for us. It was very important that we kept the sprints and iterations at a fixed length. And you can work out a pattern that suits your team. Time estimation then. spoke at the beginning about this fact that, when we're estimating time, it tends to be a finger in the air type of estimate. But what we can do is we know that the total number of points for our stories, we've sized all these stories, so we know that, for example, in the project, there's 90 points worth of stories. We can estimate what we call team velocity. This is how many points worth of work can the team do in each sprint. And at the beginning, you'll make an estimate of that. Usually we go half, depending how much resource we've gone, half the points effectively gives us an estimate. Often you'll find that the team velocity will change as the project goes on. When the project starts, you might not be able to do quite as much. People are still getting to know each other. They're getting to know the requirements of the project. As the project progresses, the team velocity can increase, so you can start to take more points from the product backlog. And we know that the iteration length is 3 weeks, because we fixed that. That's what we said we're going to do. So, simple equation, total story points divided by team velocity multiplied by the iteration length gives us an estimated time for the whole project of 18 weeks. Burndown charts, this is not a graph of the pound against the dollar after Brexit. This is a burndown chart where we have at the top here, let's see if this works, total number of task points. So we've got story points, we've taken these stories into the sprint, we've broken that down into tasks, we've sized all the tasks in the same way as we did with the stories. And so for this iteration, which is a 3-week iteration, we've got the total number of task points. As a team leader, I can watch this chart. As people are working on things, as they close off tasks that they've got to do, the number of points for those tasks come off. So the chart, as you can see, goes down. As a team leader, I can look at this and say, yeah, everything's progressing okay. If I get to a point like this where we've got a bit of a flat line, maybe I get a little bit worried, go and ask everybody, is everything okay? Usually that's fine, because what it probably means is they're just working on a task, they haven't got to the end of it, they're going to close them, and when they do close them, you're going to get a drop-off like this. But it's a tool to alert me to any possible issues, because obviously what we're wanting to achieve is at the end of the iteration, we're wanting to get down to 0 task points left. There are a couple of points in there where we've gone up a little bit. This is where maybe somebody has added in an additional requirement mid-iteration. We do try to avoid that, because the team have committed to deliver this piece of work in that 3-week period, and they commit to that at the beginning. So we try to protect the team from then getting people saying, oh, well, can you do this as well at the same time? Can you do this? Because that then type of spoils the effective contract that we've got to deliver what we said we're going to deliver. But sometimes there are needs to adapt to changing circumstances, and so mid-iteration we can take them with the proviso that we understand that is going to put up our task points a little bit. And so what we're doing here then is we're watching this, but hopefully it comes down to 0. If by the end of the iteration we've not come down, if we were up here, it maybe means that we took on a little too much. And so you may adjust the number of points that you take for the next iteration. You say, well, we'll take a few less points. If we finish before the end of the iteration, we can pull in additional tasks ahead of time and start to work on those as well. And the next iteration, we may then say, well, let's increase the number of points that we're going to take, because obviously our team velocity is higher than we thought. So our experience at RGU, issues that we had, because we don't have a very finite plan for everything that we have to do, you're working with the customer and with the developers to develop things in smaller pieces. And what we've got to be careful is that we don't gold plate the solutions. We've got some great developers, they're really enthusiastic, and they love to add on the bells and whistles. And you've got to say, well, no, what we need to deliver is the functionality, the things that we're actually wanting to do to achieve the aim of the business. Some of those bells and whistles might be great, and we might decide to add them on later on, but you've got to be careful to make sure that everybody understands that we've got to deliver what's required and not gold plate it too much. The fixed sprint length was important, this 3-week period that we fixed on. When we first started, there was a tendency to go, oh, we've got to the end of the 3 weeks, we haven't quite finished. Let's just add another week on. That'll be fine, won't it? That doesn't work at all, because then all your estimation goes out the window. You've got to be strict about it. You've got to, if you've fixed your iteration length, that's what you fixed to. If you haven't managed to meet everything, they roll over into the next iteration. As I mentioned there, we resist mid-sprint additions for the same type of reason. And communication is vital. So this is communication between the team, but it's communication with the customers and the users all the way through the sprint. So we're working with them, we're showing them things that we've developed, we're getting feedback from them, because at the end of the iteration, the testing bit is not there to define the requirements. What you don't want to do is do lots of work like a mini waterfall where you do all this work in isolation, deliver it to the customer, and they say, well, that's not quite how I want it. And so all the type of work you have to use the next iteration to fix things. What you want to do is work within that 3-week period to get out all the problems and work with the customer closely. Positives, the development starts almost immediately. You know, the developers are involved right from the start. You're not waiting months, weeks, months for large requirements gathering phases to complete and large design phases to complete. For the developers, they have clear deliverables, very clear deliverables in a fixed timescale. They know that in that 3-week period, they've got this number of tasks to complete, and they're very focused then on that. The developers love this approach because they can work to the tasks that they've got for that particular thing, and they don't have to worry about all the rest of the project. That's not to say that you're not thinking about the things that are to come in the rest of the project, and there are aspects of development that you're going to do that are going to say, well, we know that we're going to have to build something to do this later on, so we'll develop this in a particular way to make sure that we can accommodate that. That still goes on as well. We have this continual delivery of working outputs. As I said, you can then choose if you want to go live before the end of the project if the project is already able to deliver good value to the business. And the testing is spread more evenly. And this, our customers in particular found this a real benefit, because what we were doing is we're going to ask them to test just that small piece for the 3 weeks. So they found it much easier to accommodate that within their working schedule, to say, yeah, I can allocate somebody to look at that for half a day or something, rather than having to allocate to somebody for 2 or 3 weeks or longer in a very large testing phase. So it was spread much more evenly for them. So they think that that approach is much better. And the daily scrum, very valuable, again, aiding communication in the team and everything. So just to summarize then, what have we looked at? Got the Agile Stories. This is our high-level requirements. This is getting everybody around, all the team, the developers, the customers, all the users, coming up with the high-level requirements. We've looked at Agile Poker. So this is how we then size the requirements, how big are the relative sizes of each of these pieces of work. And that's actually fun. Would you believe? Oh, my definition of fun is perhaps different to yours, but I think it's great, and the development team think it's great, and we actually have fun estimating the size of things and having that good discussion about how things are going to work. We then use Moscow to prioritize things, simple prioritization system that allows the customer then to say, yeah, these are the important bits. They know how big the things are going to be, so they can make that decision in an informed way about what we're going to do first. We use this sprint methodology where we work on a time-boxed development phase, so everybody knows what they're going to deliver in a specific amount of time. We have the daily scrums, aiding communication, making sure everybody knows what's going on. And we have the burndown charts. As a team lead that I'm monitoring the project, I can be happy that we're progressing on track, and I can jump in to amend things or to help if things are not progressing to track. That's the end of the talk. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Hello, my name is Gordon. I'm from the University of Bath. You've made a lot of really good points about getting the teams to work using these methodologies. What training do you give your customers to understand Agile?
Well, in actual fact, a very similar presentation to this one is often what we've used in the past, where we've explained to them how Agile works. We talk about the sprints and we talk about why it's good. So, that's effectively what we do. But then we're working with them, so I will facilitate the story planning sessions when we're showing them the cards. It's not too difficult. For them, it's almost like a brainstorming session, and they really get involved and enjoy it as well. The cards themselves then can be used on a Kanban board. As I say, we use an electronic system for it. The customer can see those. They can add, the stories aren't fixed at the beginning as well, so we explain to the customers and everybody who we're working with that we can add in additional requirements at any point. They go into the product backlog and are sized and prioritized along with the rest of them so that we can then pull those stories in. But yeah, effectively, it's something like this. We go through this type of presentation and then facilitate the sessions with them. Yeah. There's a question.
Yes, excuse me. My question is, how did you come across those tools in the first place? It's my first time seeing it.
Well, in the development area, these have been going for quite a few times, quite a while. So it was actually about 6 or 7 years ago. As I said, we'd had these type of issues with the type of traditional project methodology. So I was looking for a different way of doing it. We work in a university, have a great library. I went to the library and I went, oh, a book on Agile, this is fantastic. Had a bit of a read of it, had a bit of a look on the internet and thought, we could try this could actually work. At the time it was type of kicking off as well everywhere, everybody was talking about Agile, so that's effectively how we did it. I read the book on it and then we started. We didn't do everything at once, because as a development team, I've tried to show you here some of the things that could be used in more general projects. But we also did a lot of other more technical Agile things. So as a development team, we're using source control, which links in with unit testing, which is automated. We have continuous integration servers, build radiators on the walls, all this type of Agile stuff as well. That's perhaps a little bit too technical for this particular conference, and I could go on all afternoon talking about that as well. So, but yeah, that's how I found out about it originally. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Colin.